week 13 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few wide receivers I have as sleepers this week. The first receiver, Calvin Austin of the Pittsburgh Steelers. We've seen some flashes from the speedy second-year wide receiver in Calvin Austin. Going back to week 8 versus the Giants, 3 catches, 54 yards, a touchdown, a return touchdown. And then week 12, he came back with a big game last week. 3 catches, 78 yards, and a touchdown. So Austin, he's been in and out of the lineup this season. He was injured early in the season. Then they haven't used him much over the last few weeks. But Russell Wilson, we know he always likes the deep ball threat. And I know Mike Williams, they traded for at the NFL trade deadline, was his Pittsburgh Steelers team. But they're still looking for that number 2 option in the receiving room. And Calvin Austin, like I said, he could line up in the slot. He could burn a secondary where he's got track star type speed. And this week at the Cincinnati Bengals, a defense that's been getting torn up all season long and burned by opposing wide receivers, I think he'd go out there and be a nice sleeper option where the Bengals give up the 11th most fantasy points to receivers on the season. And he's available in 88% of fantasy leagues. Next sleeper, Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots. And Douglas, he's still out there in 70% of fantasy leagues, surprisingly. Actually had 9 or more fantasy points 4 weeks in a row, including 2 double-digit ball games in PPR leagues. Week 10 at the Bears, 4 catches, 50 yards. Week 11 versus the Rams, 4 catches, 59 yards. And last week at the Dolphins in week 12, 5 catches, 62 yards. So the targets have been there. He's the number 1 wide receiver, in my opinion, on this team. And arguably the number 1 option in the passing game between him and Hunter Henry is Demario Douglas. So he's a speedy wide receiver. I know this offense isn't all that great, but this could be a ball game once again where they could be trailing versus the Indianapolis Colts and have to throw a whole lot. And that's where it comes in, where Douglas is going to get opportunities and targets. Like I said, there's no one really a threat in the receiving room to take snaps and targets for him. Jalen Polk, I know he's a rookie, but he hasn't done much this year. Bode, he's made a few plays here and there. KJ Osborne, he's taken a back seat. Obviously, with this team going nowhere, they're playing the kid. Demario Douglas, he is that number 1 wide receiver on this roster. And someone, like I said, still out there in 70% of fantasy leagues and a good option this week. And final wide receiver I have as a sleeper is Devon Vele of the Denver Broncos. I've mentioned Vele over the last 3 weeks and now double-digit fantasy points 3 weeks in a row. Still out there in tons of fantasy leagues at 83%. And he's that number 2 target in the passing game behind, obviously, Courtland Sutton, who's having a great season. So Bo Nix and Vele, they got a good rapport. He's a big target, 6'6", 6'7", and he's going out there and he's making plays, is Vele. Week 10 at Kansas City, 4 catches, 39 yards, a touchdown. Week 11 versus the Falcons, 4 catches, 66 yards. And week 12 at the Raiders, 6 catches, 80 yards. So the target share has been there. The route participation's been going up weekly for Vele. And I believe he is the number 2 wide receiver in this Denver Bronco offense. And this week, a good matchup on Monday night versus the Browns that give up the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. So that's a few wide receivers I have as sleepers for week 13 of the fantasy football season.